There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. And you think like, oh, well, it's a statistic, it's a data, it's a number. It is black and white, it is, right? But actually everything can be spun. Everything can be spun. And this is what's so challenging, because that leads to people in my position who are kind of really questioning certain things. Can you ever get to the truth? Or is everything just a personal truth?
I think we all get a different perspective. We often struggle to see it from someone else's. I haven't got your education, you were parented differently to me, your upbringing was different, your economic standing is different, the friends you grew up with are different, and we are always shaped by our surroundings and the people that we share time with. And arguably, you and I have shaped each other's truths to a certain degree in the time we've got to know each other.
Good evening, Nick. How you doing?
I'm very well, mate. I'm very well. Back from Arizona.
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't met for about 3 weeks now, I guess, because we missed the last two, and you've been out in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona is what rings a bell for me. Were you in Phoenix or were you somewhere else?
No, it's Scottsdale. We went into Phoenix, caught a Suns game. You're pleased to hear, I'm a basketball fan. So yeah, it was good. It was hot.
Yeah, great.
Very hot.
And how long were you there for? About 10 days or so?
Yeah, just shy. Yeah. I'm a little bit jet lagged, to be honest. I'm still trying to catch up. I think the first day I landed 8 hours behind. I had to get an early morning train the following day for a client meeting in London, and it's kind of I ended up a 4 a.m. finish. It's knocked me sideways. But sleep aside, jet lag aside, it was a really good trip. Got some sunshine, gives you some rays of happiness when you're in the sun, away from these gloomy skies here in the UK. So yeah, no, it's good.
I know. I mean, I was feeling super kind of sort of depressed from the weather on Saturday. By 4 o'clock I was hibernating in the house, and the clocks went back, I think, when you were away, so you might have noticed it even more. And now it's getting dark at like 4:30. I had my SAD lamp this morning. I had an early workshop that I was delivering at 8 o'clock this morning, so I was up at 6 when it was like pitch black. I did my exercise, did my rebounding, had the bright lights on, felt pretty good by 8 o'clock, but I need that at the moment because it's so grey and depressing. So I'm already thinking about where I can go next. It was going to be Barcelona.
It was interesting in Arizona.
Sorry?
Being the 4th of November, something I thought was interesting in Arizona is there were Trump stores. We've got to go into stores just completely dedicated to Donald Trump, which were interesting to say the least. Some of the T-shirts and paraphernalia and memorabilia and things you could pick up were interesting. I know you were talking about the concept of what is truth. We've got the election tomorrow as we record this. We don't know the result yet.
That's it.
So we'll have a chat about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought it'd be good to talk about it because I've been following a little bit of the election stuff, and I try to look at both sides. I actually listened to the entirety of both JD Vance and Donald Trump interviews on Joe Rogan podcast.
It was a 3 hour interview, isn't it, Joe Rogan?
Yeah, both of them are 3 hours. So I listened to 6 hours. Listened to all of it. I also did what I can listening to Kamala Harris when she starts to actually make sense and not does a word salad that she tends to do. But I'm not obviously going to be swaying one way or the other because it's irrelevant for me in terms of voting because I'm not a US citizen. But it is interesting because I thought you've been to the US. We've got the election tomorrow. And one of the concepts, they both seem to be going for different things in a way. They've got their different strengths, I guess. But there is this concept that keeps coming up for me, and this idea of truth. They have because obviously in politics they play different sides. They see the same thing, and then they decide it means something totally different, right? The election results, the this, the that. And so I thought it'd be quite an interesting starting point to talk about truth, and also because one of the big hot topics, it seems, at least from what I can gather, is one side believes that the other is going to censor lots of things and effectively abolish a lot of the First Amendment, the right to free speech rights, or they think they are, and the other side thinks that there's maybe too much disinformation and misinformation. They want to control the information, and this kind of begs a lot of 1984 George Orwell stuff and Ministry of Truth, which is what we're talking about. And what is truth? And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot for many years, purely because from a spiritual point of view, trying to peel the onion back, as it were, and discover new layers of reality, new layers of truth. So I guess I'm going to just leave it there and see what you think as a starting response to what is truth, or what you think about all this.
That's fair.
I'm intrigued.
Well, I think I don't know if this is well, maybe it is actually. We're here to share, right? We're not here to be politically unbiased necessarily, but this isn't a political show, so I don't want to lose some of our listeners straight away, depending on which whether you're red or blue or anything like that. But I think in relation to truth, you're absolutely right. I mean, you and I have a similar mindset and view in it, right? It's subjective. It's shaped by our individual experiences, our individual beliefs, our individual perspectives, and that will often lead to a diverse interpretation of the same event potentially. And I think that's something that not something that I appreciated when I was younger, for sure. Something I think we learn to appreciate as we get older, particularly if you're in a relationship. And I've been married for a number of years, 17 years now, and that involves sometimes seeing things from different perspectives in order to get to the same truth that works for us as a collaboration. And I think also, I know the idea, and I've said this to my wife and others in the past, that if something happens to me, one of the that I'm not that happy with, one of the first things I actually fall back on is, okay, if I was that individual with the same upbringing, same education, same parenting, all the things that they may have gone through, perhaps I would have reacted in the same way they did, even though it's not the way that I would have reacted. Now, of course, the beauty of that means that I get to shape that experience for that individual. I don't know the individual once they've done something to me. Let's say they've threatened me in the street, or they've cut me up or whatever. But it enables me to create that vision for them. I can say things, well, maybe they had a really tough time growing up and they're angry with the world and they've just had a really bad day at work or whatever it is. And I can kind of shape the truth for me to stop me from getting really angry in that moment. So I think it's like anybody, I think we all get a different perspective. We often struggle to see it from someone else's because we haven't, me and you have it. I haven't got your education, you were parented differently to me, your upbringing was different, your economic standing is different, the friends you grew up with are different, and we are always shaped by our surroundings and the people that we share time with. And arguably, you and I have shaped each other's truths to a certain degree in the time we've got to know each other in certain areas and certain contexts and things that we do. So I think truth is a really interesting subject. I think when we talk about the political angle then of the debate that's coming up in the election tomorrow, is how much of it is. Let me ask you a question back. As much as I think that we all share a diverse interpretation of the same event potentially because of the way we're shaped, how much of what you've seen in your 6 hours though isn't about truth? It's just about blatant lies in order to try and manipulate and or get people to follow you because they then make it their truth. The difficulty is sometimes we form truths in our own minds based on other people's non-truths, and sometimes that can be where it gets really, really dangerous. So I'd like to get your interesting view on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I think from the interview point of view, I thought it was quite interesting because you get time to elaborate on ideas and concepts, and whereas where you look on the news, there's lots of bite-size 15 seconds here, there. And I've heard, I think I was listening to the Diary of the CEO podcast today, and there was some other guy on there who was a staunch, I say a staunch supporter of Harris. Basically, it was the best of the bad bunch in his view, right? She shouldn't really be the nomination for the Democratic Party, he was saying. But some of the things he was saying about what the other side had said were, I don't want to say generalizations, but they were hyperbole, or they were somewhat embellished as to what that person said. Like, oh, so-and-so wants to ban abortion. No, ban abortion, was it? Yeah, something like that, right? But then the other side say, well, actually, no, we're talking about it being a decision for the states to make rather than for the federal government. Right? I'm not going to get into a whole abortion chat here, but what I notice is that there are certain themes and concepts where one side will basically expand and hyperbole what the other side has said, whereas there's a lot of nuance, and that's the problem. And people don't have time for nuance these days, and so the truth gets muddled up in all that. Now, the question I've got really is there such thing as an objective truth? Because I'm not sure that there is. In fact, I don't think that there is. And I was thinking about this as you were talking, and I'm trying to put it down to a science frame of view, because you've got subjective and you've got objective, right? So if you're in a car, I'm going to put this simply for listeners. Let's say you've got a car and you're doing 80 miles an hour. Okay. Now, let's say you don't have the speedometer in front of you and you're just looking outside the window, right? The passengers, the children, they're looking outside the window. They're going to have a subjective level of how fast that's going, right? Because that's going to be, oh, the things are whizzing past really quickly. Oh, maybe we're doing 60 miles an hour, maybe we're doing 100, maybe we're doing 1,000. We don't know, right? Whereas the driver can objectively, we're saying in this case, see that it's doing 80 miles an hour, right? So there you would think, okay, there is truth. That car is doing 80 miles an hour, okay? Do you follow me so far? Because it's going to get a bit
I do.
weird.
I think there's a question. I'll let you finish your stories. I have a question within the question here of the difference between truth and fact and whether or not they're the same thing. But
okay, yeah, well, that's also a good point. But if we expand that and we say he's not doing 80 miles an hour and we go faster and faster, now the faster you go, we're going to go into special relativity here and science. Different people perceive speed and time and distance differently depending on where they're looking at the thing they're looking at, right? From an observer point of view, sitting on the sidelines versus the person sitting in the car, that speed will actually be different. That will appear different to those people, because one thing that Einstein ultimately teaches in his theories of relativity is that word relative or relativity, that things are relative to something else. And so the speed that we actually have our own speed internally, right? We have our own body clock, in fact, right? Because the faster that we travel towards the speed of light, not that we are able to accelerate to that speed right now, but theoretically, if we could, the slower our body clock runs, right? And this has been proven through like atomic clocks out on airplanes or in space versus ones on the ground, that they tick slower, effectively, these atomic clocks. And so if time is not even objectively real, right? If time and speed, these are fundamental measurements that we use, right? Distance, velocity, time, and things like that to calculate things. If these can't be objectively true, what can be? Okay, so that's one thing. And you were talking about facts. You wanted to ask a question about truth and true facts.
But I'll tell you why I thought on that, because Nietzsche said that there is no such thing as facts, only interpretations, right? And I was thinking about your car example there. For me, I can make it quite simply in my mind. When I look over, I'm a really high hotel or high cliff. You look over, you think, God, that's really, really high. My interpretation of that is I'm really high. I don't like heights. You get that feeling of what's the word? You know what I mean? When you're scared of heights, anyway. Yeah. So you're a bit frightened. Yeah, I can go in an aeroplane at 35,000 feet and not necessarily feel like I'm particularly high because of the context of my surroundings. You can look down and they look small. And actually, the fear isn't there, even though you're way, way, way higher. Almost the perspective changes so much to such a greater degree that the fear actually is gone, and and you're okay. And maybe that's because there's a metal case around you. You don't feel like you're going to fall out. Whereas when you're over a cliff, you feel like you could jump over and you're more in control of what could happen next. But I think again, it still relates to the interpretation of it. And I'd be interested to know if you think there is a difference. Nietzsche, I would argue, in that statement, would suggest that we disagree, but in the way that you've described it as well, that truth and fact are almost one and the same, because both require interpretation, both require, without an interpretation, it's only a fact if we choose to interpret it in that particular way. And often it goes back to what is subjective.
It reminded me of one of the politicians.
Well, you talked about science, right? I mean, if we take a philosophical view on it, truth is based on relativism. Relativism is the right word? You know where I'm going, relativism.
Well,
perspective.
Relativity, yeah.
It's based on what we think is real, so realism. There's loads of different things that sort of play into what is a truth. For me, though, I hadn't really considered it till you were talking a moment ago. Fact is more something that, for me, I can see in front of me. This is a calculator and I'm holding it. That's a fact. But you might have others that still challenge that. Where would your distinction shift between a fact and a truth?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I remember there was a politician not that long ago. I can't remember whether it was Donald Trump politician or a different size politician. They were talking about true facts, and I was thinking how it's a bit of an oxymoron. True,
Yeah.
there are facts, and there are true facts, and there are, because it was like, oh, it's a fact that, I don't know, whatever, so and so did this job or this war crime or this, right? But then he goes, there are true facts, and I'm like, hang on a second, shouldn't a fact be true? So for me, they are in a way the same, in that a fact should be true, right? You know, because otherwise it's not a fact, it's made up, it's fiction, right? Hence, if it's not true, it's fiction. If it's true, it's fact, right? But truth doesn't have to necessarily be a fact, if that makes sense. I guess so. If I'm
And you may challenge
truth,
this. I think from a political point of view, going back to the election, I think where maybe a distinction could lie, and I'm thinking out on my feet here to see as I try and work out the difference myself, right, is the role of language has a huge part to play in what influences our understanding of what truth is. That's not to say you can't try and convince me that isn't a calculator I'm holding and actually it's something else. But for me, that you have to really, really work hard to convince me otherwise. But from a political point of view, actually, our understanding of what truth is often manipulated, or maybe I should use the word shaped rather than manipulated. But our perceptions and meanings are shaped by the language that we hear, and that can often lead to either misunderstandings or different levels of interpretation. By choosing what we want to listen to and what we don't, you'll probably know the answer to this. But I know we have a skill as humans to tune into certain bits of information and miss whole other bits of information. And there's something to do with our internal hearing and our brains work. And I'd be interested to know that depending on your cultural background as well, whether we tune in more to one politician over another and their language because of certain words and things they say, because of how we've culturally come to understand the world. But you might know what that is. I'll quickly Google it and have a look.
I think
there's a way that we tune in.
Probably the reticular activating system, maybe that that focuses
on
it might be that you're into. I think it's the RAS, the reticular activating system. But I think the language bit is really important, because we have to agree, firstly, language, because you just said earlier that you're holding up a calculator, right? So that is a fact in your mind. Now, if we can't agree that that is a calculator, first and foremost, then it's not a fact in my mind, right? Because you're holding up an orange,
sure,
right? For example, this is why language changes over the centuries. I appreciate that, but sometimes now language is changing to such a point where things are almost nonsensical, right? So we could argue, and I don't want to go into a gender identity conversation here, right? But I heard it earlier today on one of the YouTube videos. One of the guys was asking, what would seemingly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, at least when I was a child, well, which is more than 15 years ago, would be a simple answer, right? A simple question, simple answer. And the question was this to this woman: can a man get pregnant? Now, you'd think that should just be a simple answer, right? Yes or no, right? It's fact, it's biology. Now, there are people who are questioning what we have considered to be essential facts. And I listened to a whole hour conversation about this idea between male and female and multiple sexes, not genders. By and large, they were talking about sexes. And there's a whole thing around intersex, but that's still, at least this people were arguing, it's still defining it as an intersex between the two sexes, right? It's still two sexes. So anyway, the point is that should have been a simple question to answer, right? Probably when I was at school, it would be a straightforward no, right? Now, that woman didn't have an answer for that. She said, well, it depends, right? If there are, I often say that the answer to every question in the universe is it depends, because a lot of things depend, right? It depends on your definition of this, depends on this, and what we consider to be true. And so I think this is where I think that there is no absolute truth, but there are certain things that we fundamentally have to agree on to have a tendency towards truth, right? Even
to have some kind of law and order and societal understanding of how we behave.
Because even the laws of physics, right? The laws of physics, which we think are immutable, unshakable laws, one scientist I remember saying, and it really resonated with me, they're not really laws, right? They're kind of tendencies, right? It's probably more accurate to say tendencies of physics as opposed to laws of physics, because we learn and we discover different things, and some of these laws can be quote unquote broken or changed, just like a human law can be, right?
Isn't that
So
why everything's a theory in the world of science? Because it's only ever a theory, because it can always be, it's always there to be
well,
challenged in the future
this
with a
is
new
also an
theory. Or
interesting. Well, this is also quite interesting because science is based on, coming up with hypotheses, developing, testing those hypotheses, and then developing theories until they're later proven to be inadequate, incomplete, or inaccurate. And this is where, a lot of people were, the last few years, were pulling the science hat out on and saying, this is science, right? If this is science. But there is no such thing as an absolute truth within science. Now we could say, okay, well, gravity is the truth, right? You pick up I pick up my pen and we drop it. There's a force acting on it. Now that actually might not even be true, right? Because as Einstein said, gravity is not necessarily, we call it a force, but really what it's doing is it's a warping of space and time, right? So if you imagine space-time being a big sheet, so imagine you and I are holding a big bed sheet, right? And it's quite taut. Now, if we put like a bowling ball in the middle of that sheet, it's going to sag, right? You can get that. Now, if I had a marble and I was trying to roll it across to you, what would happen to that marble is it wouldn't roll straight to you. It's going to start to like kind of curve in to the big bowling ball, right? It's going to start to swivel around. Now, if everything's right, that's actually how the orbits of the planets work around the sun, right? It's actually like a constant fall in motion, but it's just enough to keep it in orbit. If it's too strong, it's going to be engulfed. If it's too weak, it's going to go off. This is what happens when comets or asteroids come past the Earth, right? If it's in one way or the other. And so it's not even true to say it's a force pulling that thing down. It's really a warping of space and time, right? So, and that might be wrong.
so let's
as
go
well,
back. I'm
right? We
conscious
might
of
find.
of time. We're not losing the audience too far into the world of science when we're talking about a big election for America tomorrow. So let's bring it back to truth. I think you've made the point perfectly about nothing really is not what is true, what is fact. Everything can be challenged. But I answered the question for you earlier in terms of what my version of what truth is. I think we've examined a couple of things about the things that play on it. For me, I talked about the fact that everyone has a different different background, different experiences, relativism, realism even. So you and I have been through heartbreak and losing our parents recently. Truths for me in that moment would probably be different to potential truths that I would see now. I think that for me, a really important thing to bear in mind is truths can change. I know that's an oxymoron as well, but if we always stay in that belief system that this was true for me then, and therefore that's always going to be the case, actually that can put you into a bit of a spiral of not great thoughts, right? We want to be able to change our destiny, which I know is another oxymoron, but the idea of being able to change and things can move, and it's all about how we interpret things. And I think we've talked about the role of language, how that can have an impact on our understanding of truth and how words can shape the meanings and our perceptions. There's a cultural thing at play here, emotional one, which I just mentioned with the dad loss. What is it for you? What are the other things that can play on people's minds? How do you see the word truth? Do you agree with the way I see it? Do you think the truth can change?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because as you were saying that, it brought me back to this idea we've talked about before about belief, and I've said belief is like if your belief about something is like a tabletop, and the legs underneath supporting that tabletop are your references as to why you believe that thing to be true, right? I'm no good at sports, let's say, and I have 4 references, for argument's sake, for the 4 legs of the table that prove that to be the case, right? When I picked up a table tennis thing, I kept missing the ball, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't necessarily make it true, because you might suddenly discover that actually your sport is, I don't know, ice skating, right? For want of a better example. So then that belief in that truth, and I'm just wondering whether maybe truths are really beliefs, because we could, like, for example, there was a really interesting comment that was made recently by Joe Biden. Now, I don't know if you've been caught up with the whole Puerto Rico thing that was being talked about. I don't know if you saw any of this, but a comedian who's famous for roasting people, right, which is basically insulting people, was up at a Trump rally, and he was talking about a bunch of different things from what I can understand, or not a bunch of different things, but within the joke, there was more context to what was being shown. But anyway, he equated Puerto Rico through the joke with being like a big floating garbage thing, right? And that's blown up, right, on social media. Then Joe Biden later then went on Kamala Harris's closing speech or something on some Zoom call, but basically said that Trump's supporters are garbage, right? However, right, so you can actually watch this clip, right, and you can see the words he says and everything else. So you'd think, okay, that is true. That's what he said. However, what the Democratic Party and the White House and everything are saying is that, and when they released the transcript, I don't know how this works, but they said, oh, no, he meant it as something else, and there's an apostrophe that should be under supporters, and it's actually, he was talking about the supporters of the comedian, blah. And I'm like thinking, how is it that we get to that stage where we are seeing things, right? We're seeing this is an orange, this is an orange, this is an orange, and someone is telling me, no, that's a car, that's a car, that's a car, until we succumb and say, okay, that was a car. So I guess I'm not sure whether that's answering the question, but I feel like there's a muddiness that you can see something for your own two eyes as being true, but then someone is trying to tell you.
It does answer it. You know? So there's a bigger question. I think something that came to mind. You mentioned the orange earlier. Like in some other cultures, there's more colours than we have in Western culture. They have more, orange to one might mean orange to something else. And it's only because someone somewhere along the line has defined orange to be what it is that we know it to be what it is. So someone else's belief, truth, or interpretation is still influencing us today. So I guess the question would be, as we sort of explore what beliefs are and the differences, definitely the deeply held beliefs we have definitely influence our perception of what is real and what is true. But I guess the question I'm going back to myself now is then, if they can change and they are indeed beliefs, is does the idea of truth even exist? Now, some people would even say that, well, the one truth we do know is that we all die. Well, we do at the moment, but science is evolving. We don't know the future. And actually, we can't categorically say that will always be the case for the rest of human time either. So, and then you would argue that's probably a fact and scientific proof and whatever, because we only know what was been before. But it's only when new information comes to light that we change those theories that you were talking about earlier, and we dispel what we knew before with something else. So is there any singular universal truth? Does truth even exist in any form, or is it actually all just a series of deeply held beliefs?
I mean, honestly, I'm coming to the idea
I didn't know we were going to go that far today, by the way. But you've got me thinking.
Well, I think it doesn't, because I was thinking about this. Again, we're going back to science a little bit, but when we look at the stars, and we can look in any direction, we can only really see about 13.5 billion years worth of light. So we perceive the universe to be 13.5 billion years old, and the observable universe that we've got is potentially less than 10% of what it might be out there. And actually, it might be the case that should the light from every aspect of the universe get to us, the whole sky would be light. Now, we see something totally different because we see the universe as finite, we see it as this. But I think that the deeper you go, I might uncover that there's more and more layers to the onion. So I remember from the first Men in Black movie. Now, this has jumped out at me. But I think it was the first Men in Black movie, right at the closing credits, towards the closing credits. Eventually, you zoom out from the Earth and you zoom to the solar system and you zoom out to, I think, the galaxy, and then basically the universe. And then it turns out that these weird big creatures playing with like marble type things, which is our entire universe. And there's another universe. And then it begs to me, what is beyond those people, those creatures playing with the marbles, right? Is there yet another thing? And I think we talked about my Boofu experience a couple of sessions ago, where I effectively felt like I transcended this reality. I went to different realities and I ended up at this other dimension. But then I'm thinking, maybe there's something beyond that, and we don't know. So I feel like my head explodes when I think.
Let me ask a different question then, because we've talked a lot about science, which is often based in empirical evidence, right? The idea that, as you said, things go through, we determine what we believe to be fact or whatever it is, term we want to use to it. But I think there is there's a difference potentially in people's interpretations of what is a scientific truth and what is a personal truth. So would you see there being a distinction between the two terms? Because I would say the second is very much shaped around our individual experiences and our interpretations and the things that we hold true to ourselves. Can the, I don't know, or do you have them as one and the same and you can't split the two? Are they inextricably linked?
I think that people have definitely tried to split them. For example, I remember during COVID, where there was a huge suppression in various amounts of data being allowed out. And I was kind of all over it with the Office of National Statistics information, looking at the data. And I remember there was one comment by someone saying, well, yeah, they've taken the right data, or the data they're presenting is correct, right? But their conclusions are wrong, right? I.e., not their conclusions were wrong, their conclusions don't align with what I want it to be. And so we can take facts, and I think, I can't remember who the quote is by, but it's one of these writers, you've heard it before, right? There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. And you think like, oh, well, it's a statistic, it's a data, it's a number, right? You can, it is black and white, it is, right? You polled 100 people, 50 people have said this, 50 people, but actually everything can be spun. Everything can be spun. And this is what's so challenging, because that leads to people in my position who are kind of really questioning certain things. Can you ever get to the truth, or is everything just a personal truth? And the more I think about it, yes, we can objectively say, right, I'm sitting in a chair right now, I'm driving a car, and we go, that is true. But there are more subtle things where you think it's objective and you think it's black and white, but yet someone will say, no, what you heard, you're saying the right information. The information is correct that you put, but actually your conclusion around that is wrong. And that could be true, right? For example, it reminds me of this picture. I don't know if you've seen this picture, and I remember it vividly, but there was a picture of a black and white picture of a male and a female, a man and a woman, who were kind of like holding each other, but then like it felt like they were being torn away from each other. And you had to decide what that picture was about, right? And we were seeing that. But what was actually happening when you saw a bigger frame of it was there were like military people on either side, and they were separating them or something like that. And so the interpretation was really different. And so we don't see the whole picture a lot of the time. We see a small part of the picture.
No. And often, so actually, to take that level further, often the only picture we see is the one of the echo chamber that we've wanted to see, right? So whether you're a Trump supporter or not, or whether you're Kamala Harris supporter, it doesn't really matter. The point is, we'll often look for the truth that support the narrative that we want to have in our own minds, probably again based on our upbringings and things we had before. So truth is often just a reflection of all those collective agreements, the collective things that we see that reinforce our view, and therefore often the arguments come through later because we've read all this and I've read more than you and I know more than you, therefore my truth is correct because this is the research I've done. And often it moves us further and further away from what actually is objective reality, because we often look for things that confirm our view rather than actually challenge it. And I think that makes it difficult. There's a really interesting study, and I think I've talked about this before, about, I think it was 100 people ever was, I put into a room, this was years ago, I think it was back in the 70s, you might know the study, where they gave a relatively easy mathematical problem to solve for the whole group. And it was something, I don't know what let's make it up to 22 out of 22, right? And when they had to stand on the answer, and 99 of the people stood on 45, and the other 99 were actors, and the other individual being tested had no idea. And he went with in their minds, they knew the answer was 44, but everyone else has gone to 45. So what did they do? They went to 45. They did the same experiment again with 2 people and 98 actors. As soon as they had one view that confirmed their own, that stood on 44, they went with the 44. But it took just that one extra person. And if you look at COVID, herd mentality, and not talking about what's better to safeguard us, but more to how they got the populace to do a certain thing and how they controlled their narrative and how they released information that supported it. So we all found our own truths, and then we pass those truths on to others. I'm using the word truth quite liberally here. It's quite interesting. And I think the things you've raised there are really interesting as well. I think actually, having not known it coming into this conversation, Harry, I'm probably coming away going, there is no such thing as a universal truth or a truth. It's just all beliefs, and we can choose to use the word if it supports us and we feel it's supportive. But actually, sometimes the word truth can be a really, really damaging one as well if we think something's true and it can't be changed or altered. So,
I think you're right. I think actually what your description of that science experiment, which I am familiar with, reminds me of a video. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I used to show it in some of my workshops. And I can't remember what it was titled, but we called it The First Follower. Was it The First Follower? Because it's not about the leader, right? So there's a video, and they're like on, say, Primrose Hill or Hampstead Heath or something like that. And a bunch of people sitting down, and then there's some music going in the distance. And then there's one guy who gets up and he starts dancing, right? And then everyone else is just sat there, right? And you think, oh, there's a crazy person dancing. It's only when that first person who's brave enough to be the follower, not the leader, the first follower, then a second and a third and a fourth, and suddenly the whole place is dancing. And it just goes to what you were talking about with that mathematics experiment, where that person needed that reinforcement of someone else fighting their corner. Because maybe at that point, yes, they knew it was 44, but they're thinking, is there something I'm not getting? Is there something that I'm missing? And so there's a bit of doubt. So it might not just be sheep mentality. It might be, am I missing something? Did I miss the briefing where it said add one to the answer or whatever the thing might be? But yeah, I think that we definitely saw that during COVID, herd mentality, all of this. We saw it during, I think, the London riots of 2011. I think, where people were
for sure. And you've read David Goggins' book, haven't you? Never Heard or whatever. But he wrote a second book. The second book opens with a study about rats. And I've talked about this before, but at the start of it, they put a rat in water and they see how long it will swim until it gives up because it can't get out. And the first time it tries, it swims, it eventually gives up, and it would have drowned to get saved. But it gave up swimming after about 8 hours or something, whatever it is. I'm going to read the study with the book. But what they did is after like an hour before it gave up, someone would come in and save the rat, rest it, and then put it back in the water. They did this over and over again. And by the end, of course, the rat was able to, they left it and see how long it would go for. It went for like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 days until it gave up, because it had the belief then, of course, it was going to be saved. So it kept going. It's only when we don't have that belief we give up much sooner. So I think there's, again, we're talking about beliefs now rather than truth. And hope. Yeah. Well, all these things play in, right? And the truth in the first time was it defined its own truth by saying, I won't get saved, I'm going to die, what's the point, let's give up. And the hope went, and it stopped swimming. So I think there's there's a responsibility for all of us to define our own truths in inverted commas, whatever that means. Maybe that's part of our journeys to find out what that single truth is. But I think
it's so personal, and I think this is where I feel a lot of challenges with certain things where we talk about restrictions coming in, right? I think there was a law passed in Scotland, something about hate speech or something like that. But then it's like, what do you define as that, right? Who decides that, right? What is that interpretation? Is it that someone gets offended and therefore it's hateful? And so I think there's a real danger, because I honestly think that there's an objective truth. I think we can say that in a society, we agree that certain things we call objectively true, right? If you break the speed limit, the speed gun has gone on, right? Objectively, you're going 40 miles an hour, right? You can argue till high heavens about Einstein and whatever, but it doesn't change the fact that in our domain, we were calling that 40 miles an hour. And so, yes, there's that level of objective truth, but I don't know it's all the way through. And so I think that you can change things. And this is where it's difficult with politics, because I do listen to things from both sides. When it comes to food, like I listen to the vegan side, I listen to the paleo side, I listen to the carnivore side. And then I decide the truth for me in this moment, knowing that it's not really a truth. It's just a tendency of what works for me. Yeah, it's an opinion. And it's also a little bit like a science experiment, right? I'll eat a certain way for a number of years and see how that affects me, or for a few months or a few days or whatever. And then there'll be a different truth, right? Different time of my life, different time of year, I may eat differently. And so I think it's important to get that variety of sources. And I think that a lot of people maybe don't, or they think they do, but then they're, like you say, they're so wedded to what they believe. And it's not like you believe what you see, it's you see what you believe. And so if you believe something, you'll see that in that conversation. You'll see that in that.
This is where
in that
social media has become so dangerous, right? Because if you're watching a video or you're reading a blog, it'll recommend similar videos, similar blogs, and all it really does is confirm the echo chamber, because it's giving you things that very rarely gives you a contrarian view. It'll give you things that support it. It wants to keep you on the channel. So we keep reading, and it cements that belief, that whatever it is you want to call it, that opinion, that truth. And then we believe we can almost become arrogant with it. I'm always very wary now. I never used to be. Maybe I was one of these people. I'm very wary now of anyone that says, I'm right, you're wrong. Because, as you say, like, everything is subjective and objective. And I read that book, Letting Go, which had it is on the bookshelf. This one here.
Yeah.
Really good book. The Pathway of Surrender by David Hawkins. Really, really recommend this when I was watching on video. But at the end of that, or near the end of that book, at the start of the book, he scores everything. Everything has a kind of scale. But towards the end of the book, it's interesting that he gives the atheists the lowest ranking, because he feels that he talks about religion, different things. What he says, though, if an atheist has an opinion, they're already closed-minded in his eyes. They're saying something doesn't exist. They're making a real statement, whereas, don't know what religion you are, there's an ability for someone who's more open-minded to have a higher psychological score, if you like, or an open score, letting go score. Now, I'm not here to say whether you're right, wrong, if you're an atheist or not. But the point is, I'm not there to also push my narrative of my beliefs, if you like, to say, well, I believe you're wrong, that something does exist or it doesn't. I'm just open-minded to whatever might come. I don't know the answer. I'll follow the beliefs that might be true for me. I like to feel my dad around. There'll be people that go, that's physically not possible. Science says this. Well, we don't really know is the answer. So you can, that's the beauty of it. Find your own truths that work for you, that push your narrative forward. And with the truths that don't push it forward, try and let go, read the book, or find, alternative viewpoints that maybe help you to get out of the mire and start moving forward.
I mean, I think that's it at the end of the day, right? Does it help or hinder you? Like, does believing this thing or this truth that you hold about yourself or the situation, does it help you or does it hinder you? I mean, I think with science, what has become a problem for me, and I'm speaking from a science background, and one of the reasons I dropped it a lot of the time is because there were so many approximations and I realized it wasn't actually truth, a lot of it. It was, especially in astrophysics, you're kind of, you're saying, oh, well, the mass is roughly this, or the shape is roughly this, so we'll use this equation. And everything became so too approximate. I was like, okay, it's not really objectively true, as opposed to maths, which I do prefer because it's, at least for intensive purposes of this conversation, more true. But what I was going to say when it comes to, I think I've lost my train of thought now. But the point is that if truth is malleable, if it helps you, make it move to help you. If it hinders you, right, make it move to help you even more, right? I mean, I think the point is you have the choice, like we talk about in so many things, to shift your reality, even though the reality might be reality. Like, okay, I'm jobless, I've broken my leg, I've whatever. It's true objectively, right? I'm injured right now. I told you before, I've got a torn calf and my hand is hurting. That's objectively true. But I can change the meaning. I can change the conclusion, if you like, that I draw from that to create a new truth. So I think ultimately, I don't believe in an ultimate level of truth.
I think that's powerful. I think
it's all layers.
People that listen to this, I agree. For people that listen to this, right, there'll be people that have insecurities, right? We know self-esteem is low. There's almost a crisis across the Western world for low self-esteem at the moment, and how people are perceived, with the social media and other influences that we have that add to that challenge. But there'll be people who are watching this that don't like the way they look. They feel like they're ugly. There might be a truth for them. They might feel that they're overweight or they're fat, or whatever the word you want to use, and that's true for them. That they're stupid, that's true for them. They create these truths. Now, it's like there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like, it's what are you comparing yourself to? Number one, like, comparison's the thief of joy straight off the bat. But whatever your shape, size, looks, level of perceived intelligence, whatever. Again, that may also be down to cultural factors, to the way you were brought up, to your access to education, to economic factors, socioeconomic, so many different things that play there. And also, it's so objective, to use your word. Like, for someone might look at me and think I'm the ugliest man on the planet, and that's fine. As long as my wife doesn't, I'm okay, right? So that's all right. And I think sometimes we can really get ourselves into a problem when we think that everyone else thinks this thing of us. when actually that's usually way off the truth. And unless you'd be surprised that most people don't even notice. They're too wound up in their own misaligned truths and their own issues and their own lack of self-esteem sometimes. And they haven't got a chance to lift their heads up and even notice the incorrect truths that you're viewing yourself with. So I think it's important that people realize they do have the power, as you've just highlighted really well, to change the truths or the beliefs really they have of themselves, to realize that we're in a really, really big community, connected world where who's right about anything? Let's be honest. I can give you an opinion now, and there's probably 4 billion people that would challenge it immediately, and that's okay. And we often find our tribes by being with the people that collectively share the way that we see the world, and that's okay too.
So I just want to finish that. I know you're on time. I just want to jump in because I realize, although I believe that there's probably no real objective truth when you go down levels and levels, we do have to operate on certain levels, right? So if we're operating on the level of humanity or biology or something like that, we have to agree on some level of truth or fact about certain things, because otherwise, if everyone disagreed about the facts and the truth, we can't get anywhere. Because if someone says this is 30 miles an hour, but no, someone else says there's 25, we can't put speed limits, we can't put signs up, we can't do things like that. So I think there has to be a level, but I feel like it's almost a point where we have this agreement, but we know that it's our best bet so far, but it might change. So I don't know if that's a good place for me to leave that thought or not, but
well,
so
I think we've got an interesting time tomorrow. Let's see who has shaped the nation with their language.
I'm not going to ask you for a prediction, because we're going to, either way, if we're right or we're wrong, I don't know what that says about us when this comes out in 2 or 3 weeks time. So I'm not going to predict what's going to happen tomorrow or whenever the results come out. But I know it's going to be close.
Down to 17 states, isn't it? I think at the moment it could go either way. So we'll see.
It could go either way. And the problem, I think, with the states, sorry to all the US listeners, is I think like 45 of the states or 42 of the states always vote the same way. So it always comes down to just a few states. And I think there's a problem with the two-party system, and maybe there should be 5.
I think it's the same problem in the UK, buddy.
We have the same problem. We have the same problem.
By county, right? And if we did it by majority, then we'd have different seats in the House. And very happy to talk politically about our current party, because as a small business owner, it's absolutely hammered us, the recent budget. But hey, probably not a place to go right now. Another day.
No.
But look, good to see you, buddy. Let's see. Well, I'm sure we'll be messaging each other, but it'll be interesting to see what the results come from the election.
Yeah, I'm eager to find out, see what we get.
Certainly very interesting being in Arizona during the time, watching and listening to the Americans and going into the Trump store. And it's very different. Yeah. Well, I say it's very different here in the UK, but then we've just had Boris here, haven't we? And you never thought that would actually ever happen, and it did. So who knows?
Yeah. That's another interview I listened to, actually. His 2-hour-long one with Stephen Bartlett. So I listen to a lot of interviews. I try to get a rounded opinion on things. So.
You've done the whole of today's episode, but I'm watching a video with what's almost like a halo around your head, because your head is exactly in the middle of your logo. You've done all with a halo, buddy. So
there we go. Yeah,
nicely positioned. All right, well, listen, good to speak to you, buddy. Interesting chat about truth. I don't know if we've got to, I guess ultimately we don't know if there is such a thing. It's a journey we're always seeking to find.
But it is true that we need to end. It's true that we need to end the call now, because you have another call to get to. So that I think is objectively and subjectively true. Who knows? All right. Thank you, everybody, for playing along with us. And do remember to like and share the content when you hear it.
Absolutely. Cheers, guys. Take care.